So welcome. Like Ken said, we are in the middle of a series called Made, and you might not know what we've been talking about on a Sunday morning, but a few weeks ago we talked about puberty. Last week we talked about sex, and guess what? We're still talking about it. So I really think it's amazing that Ignite actually wants to talk to you about sex and what it says in the Bible, what God says. Because when I was in middle school, no one told me anything about it. My parents didn't say anything, school didn't say anything, church didn't say anything. So I really think it's a good thing that you're learning it somewhere. Then like I said, when I was in middle school, we just seemed to be obsessed about talking about sex all the time. It was on TV, it was in the movies, it was in our songs. I mean, here's some songs that were out when I was in middle school, so getting jiggy with it. That was Will Smith. Body Bumpin', Sex and Candy, and the Thong Song. So, is that good? And like I said, everyone was always talking about it. People were doing it, and some people didn't even know what it was. And when I was in middle school, and I feel like even today, sex and sexual activity just seem like really casual parts of our world. So before I go any further, I do want to clarify the terms I'm using today. So there's sex and sexual activity. So sex is the actual physical act of sex. Sexual activity is kind of like a catch-all, like everything else. So it can be sex, the physical act, but it can also be kissing, touching in a sexual way, making out, and messing around. So like I said, when I was in middle school, it just seemed like the world viewed sexual activity very casually, like it was not a big deal. But I feel like it's even more true for you guys today. You guys are just bombarded with messages like all day long, sex, 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 sex. You have your social media, you have Snapchat, TikTok, Instagram. I mean, the guys with their shirts off, the girls in revealing clothing. You have that picture, you have to make sure like the lighting's right, the angle's right, the best picture to get the most likes. When I was in middle school, I didn't even have a phone. Like cell phones weren't out yet. And the internet was like this dial-up thing, it just started. So the closest we got to seeing nude pictures of people were like in National Geographic in science class or like walking past Victoria's Secret. So you're probably like, okay, who cares? What's the big deal? But the problem is if you treat sexual activity casually, it actually hurts us more than we realize. Because all of these sexual actions are actually more powerful than we think it is. So today we're going to look at a book in the Bible written by Paul, who was an early key leader in the Christian church, and he wrote a letter to some people who lived in this city called Corinth, and the Corinthians lived in a culture really similar to ours. So they were like always talking about sexual activity, treating it really casually, so kind of like how it is today. So he decided to write a letter to the Christians in Corinth to encourage them to take a different approach. And this is what he had to say. There it is. Run from sexual sin. No other sin so clearly affects the body as this one does. For sexual immorality is a sin against your own body. So he wasn't playing around. He was like, you need to run away from it. Like, get away. But like, get away from what? Like, what are we running from? What does that mean? So what it meant was the people should flee from anything that approached sexual activity in a way that doesn't line up to what God meant it to be. So, in other words, like to run away from the idea that being sexual with someone else is something that's very casual and you could just explore it and experiment with it and use people. And I really think it's interesting that Paul used the word run, not like walk away or avoid it or try your best, but like run. Turn around, go the other way. That is how serious he really was. And I think it would be the same thing he would tell us today, that we need to run from anything that would encourage us to treat sexual things and activities like they don't matter. Why? Because when we treat sex casually, we're actually hurting ourselves and others. Like I know families that have been broken apart because a mom or a dad has had sex outside of their marriage. Or maybe you know somebody who's like facing consequences, negative consequences from sex. Or maybe you're just ashamed and you feel guilty for maybe the thoughts and the way you've treated sexual activity and sex in your life. So the one thing I do want to say is This verse is not directed towards people who are victims of sexual abuse. So that could mean if you were touched or if you were hurt in a sexual way, this is not to you. God does not hold you accountable for someone else's sin. You did not sin, and it's not your fault. So I'm really sorry that if that is you, that you're experiencing that sexual pain in your life, and to know that that's not what God wants for you, and that is not part of his plan. And if you did need someone to talk to, your small group leader is a really good place to start. So when we do make choices that treat sex casually, you kind of go towards this area, which is sexual sin. So sexual sin, great. Okay, so if you go towards this area, towards sexual sin, you open up the door to the possibilities of being hurt. I don't know what's going on here. Of being hurt, and the possibility of having to deal with that guilt and that shame and negative consequences to your thoughts and actions. So you might be sitting there like, okay, well, how do I know if I'm moving towards this area, towards sexual sin? Like, how far can my thoughts and actions go? And if you're thinking that, I would say to you, you might be already in the wrong direction, that God doesn't want you to go down toward sexual sin. So what I think Paul really wants us to take from this message is, because God made sex, sexual things matter. Paul, he literally encouraged us to run from a casual approach of sexual activity and instead to embrace what God created it to be. Something important that matters. And it's really cool because if you're running away from this, you're also running towards something else called sexual integrity. So sexual integrity is that you are following God's plan and what he wants for your life, even when no one's around. So what he desires for you to have and what his plan is for you, that's when you're going towards sexual integrity. And God's best for us, like what he wants for us, he loves us so much, and he has this amazing plan. Is that not worth running toward? I mean, I really think it is. Like, he knows what's best for us. So, again, said that already. Because God made sex, sexual things do matter. And regardless of what the world says about it, that is the truth. And when we start treating sexual activity like it matters, the way Paul encouraged us to, we're taking a step towards God's plan, towards sexual integrity. And I know sometimes you're like not sure where your thoughts and actions are. I mean, I get it. It's like there's a whole fluid line of what's going on. But I do know that no matter where you are, you can always start to take steps towards sexual integrity, towards God, and away from sexual sin. So the first thing we could do is we can run from the world's view, like they view it very casually. And maybe for you that means changing the music you listen to, or the YouTube videos you're watching, or the links you're clicking on, or maybe just even the conversations that you're a part of. Or maybe it can just mean you stop and you think about the thoughts that are running through your head continually. Or if you know your behavior and your actions are not what line up with God's plan, maybe you should change it. And no matter where you are with this, the first thing you can do is always make a choice to run from the sexual sin and choices to sexual integrity. So we can run towards God's plan for sexual things in our life. So a few things that might help you, if you're like, what, I don't know how to do this. A few things you can help use to get there. One, set boundaries. So if you're like in a relationship, right when you start, you should set boundaries with your girlfriend or boyfriend and say, I don't want to be alone together without our parents, or like a line that you won't pass sexually. Because when you are in it, in that moment, it's really hard to resist sexual sin. Or maybe it's just paying attention to like the movies and the TV and the music that you are listening to, those messages that you're getting. If they don't line up with what God has planned, maybe you should change it. Maybe you shouldn't listen to it. Or maybe ask someone to hold you accountable, which means someone is helping you be where you want to be. So like if I wanted to lose weight, I'd ask my daughter, hey, make sure I don't eat those cookies in the kitchen. So you can just even ask your small group leader, like, hey, can you ask me every week how I'm doing with my thoughts and my behaviors? And they'll be able to hold you accountable. And whatever it is, you can always remember that choosing to run towards God's best for you, to move towards sexual integrity, is the best choice you can make, now and later. I mean, because God made sex, sexual things really do matter. So you might be sitting there going, uh-oh, I've already messed up. But guess what? The amazing thing about God is He loves us so much. He loves us so much no matter where we are. And all you have to do is run away from sexual sin and take a step towards Him. I mean, you can choose to treat sex like God made it to matter, because it really does. So, I get this message may be hard for some of you, and it may be hard to do what's different because your friends aren't doing it. But when we do, and we trust that God has what's best for us in store, I mean, choosing to run toward Him is a choice you're never going to regret. So, when you're going to small group, you're going to have a 2-minute break. I want you to think about this question. What's one message about sex that I'm getting from the world around me? Okay?